My name is Rachel Monroe, and I was 30 years old, one day away from becoming a mother for the very first time. My hospital bag had been sitting by the front door for a week. A small gray blanket was folded neatly on top of it. The car seat had only just been installed after 3 days of asking my husband to do it. I used to imagine what that final walk out the front door would look like. I pictured myself holding my husband's hand, breathing through contractions, both of us nervous and excited at the same time. I never imagined I would be standing alone in the driveway with my water breaking, watching him check the time on his phone like I was the reason he might miss a flight. His parents were already waiting at the airport. Their golf resort trip had been booked for weeks, and somehow, that mattered more to him than his own wife going into labor. I told him I needed to get to the hospital. He looked at the passenger seat, then at his suitcase in the back, and said, "You'll be fine." He told me to call a taxi because the tickets were non-refundable. Then he got in the car and drove away. I didn't scream. I didn't run after him. I just stood there in the driveway, shaking, realizing that the man who had promised to protect our family had walked away before our son had even taken his first breath. What he didn't know was that someone had seen the whole thing. And by the next morning, when his phone wouldn't stop buzzing and his relaxing little getaway turned into a crisis, he called me, begging me to explain what was happening. But before I tell you what I said to him, tell me, where are you listening from today? And have you ever watched someone reveal exactly who they are in the worst possible moment? Daniel Reed did not become this way overnight. That's the part that made everything so much harder to accept. In public, he knew exactly how to play the role of a devoted husband. At work parties, he'd keep his hand on my back and tell everyone how excited he was to become a father. On social media, he posted photos of the nursery with captions about blessings and new beginnings. But at home, inside our house in Charleston, the truth looked completely different. I was 39 weeks pregnant, exhausted, swollen, still doing almost everything by myself. I folded the baby clothes, ordered the diapers, prepared the freezer meals, filled out the hospital paperwork, paid the bills, sanitized the bottles, and reminded Daniel again and again that the car seat needed to be installed before the baby came. Daniel worked as a regional sales manager for a company that sold outdoor family lifestyle products. His entire job was built around selling the idea of family togetherness. Then he'd come home too tired to help me bend down and pick up the laundry basket. Most evenings, he dropped his laptop bag on the couch and asked what was for dinner before he asked how I was feeling. If I told him my back hurt, he'd say, "Everyone gets tired." If I mentioned the baby had been kicking hard all day, he'd say that sounded like a good sign and go back to scrolling his phone. If I asked him to carry something upstairs, he sighed, like I'd interrupted something urgent. On weekends, he drove an hour to his parents' house. His father wanted company for football and golf. His mother always had a full meal waiting for her only son. At first, I told myself it was sweet that he was close to his family. Then I realized he wasn't visiting them like a grown man with his own household. He was running back to the people who still treated him like their little boy. His mother, Carol, had opinions about everything. She said I worried too much, rested too much, and acted like pregnancy made me fragile. She said women of her generation didn't need constant praise for doing what they were designed to do. His father, Walter, kept telling me that Daniel worked hard and deserved peace. I wanted to ask when I was supposed to get some peace of my own, but every time I tried to defend myself, Daniel accused me of disrespecting his family. The Friday before everything happened, Daniel came home irritated because I'd forgotten to order the smoked almonds, protein bars, and craft beer he wanted to bring to his parents' place before the golf trip. I told him I could have it delivered. He said they needed it that morning. When I suggested he stop at the store himself, he looked at me like I'd insulted him. "You've been home all day," he said. Those words landed hard. Because home all day meant laundry, cleaning, phone calls with the insurance company, back pain, swollen feet, heartburn, and trying not to panic every time I felt a tightening in my stomach. Still, I drove to the store with one hand on the wheel and one hand pressed against my belly. I bought everything on his list, plus a golf glove he'd mentioned weeks earlier. Because some foolish part of me still wanted to make him happy. I remember standing in the checkout line, shifting my weight from one foot to the other while the cashier asked when I was due. "Tomorrow?" I almost said. Instead, I smiled and told her very soon. In the parking lot, the beer case was too heavy for me to lift on my own. I stood there pretending to rearrange the bags until my neighbor, Grace Whitman, walked over and helped me load the car. She asked where Daniel was. I told her he was busy with work. She looked at me gently and said, "Rachel, busy men can still be decent men." That sentence stayed with me the entire drive home. When I got back, Daniel didn't thank me. He complained that I'd bought the wrong almonds, then criticized the dinner I'd made, saying his mother's version tasted better and was never this bland. I reminded him I'd been on my feet for hours. He just shook his head like I was making excuses. He tried on the golf glove and still never said thank you. 10 minutes later, he took the snacks, the beer, and the glove, and left for his parents' house because he wanted a real meal. I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a tiny gray bib beside my plate, wondering why I kept trying to earn love from people who treated my exhaustion like an inconvenience. The next evening, Daniel came home smiling in a way that made my stomach tighten. It was the smile he wore when he'd already made a decision and wanted me to act like I'd been part of it. I was on the couch with a heating pad on my back, finishing thank you cards from the baby shower. I hoped he'd finally arranged his paternity leave or called the pediatrician like he'd promised. Instead, he told me his parents had upgraded their trip. Scottsdale, 3 days at a golf resort. His mother had found a package deal, and his father had already booked the tea times. I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh and say it was a joke. "Daniel, my due date is next week," I said. He waved that off like I was talking about a minor headache. "Due dates are just estimates. Babies come late all the time. Besides, the tickets are non-refundable." I asked if he was serious. He looked offended and said it was a family trip. I told him our family was about to include a newborn, that our son could come any day. He sighed, like I was being dramatic on purpose, and said I wasn't the first pregnant woman in the world, that his mother had flown when she was carrying him. I reminded him I wasn't 8 months along. I was 1 day from full term, and I was supposed to stay close to the hospital. He said if I refused to let him go, he'd just go anyway. I asked if he would really leave me alone this close to labor. He said I had a phone, neighbors, ride-share apps, and a hospital nearby. Then he added that I was turning fatherhood into a prison before the baby had even arrived. A few minutes later, his mother called. He put her on speaker. She said men needed a moment too, because once the baby came, everything would be about me and the child. His father chimed in from the background that women have babies every day and I'd be fine. Carol told me that if I started acting helpless now, Daniel would never get any peace as a father. I said peace didn't mean abandoning responsibility. She gave a soft laugh, the kind that sounds polite but feels like a slap, and told me I'd understand marriage better once I stopped expecting my husband to orbit around me. I told Daniel quietly, "If you leave and something happens, I won't forget it." He asked if that was a threat. I said it was a boundary. He rolled his eyes, but I saw the anger underneath it. After that, he treated me like I was punishing him for something. Short answers. Complaints about the hospital bag by the door. He installed the car seat wrong and then told me to stop nagging when I pointed it out. I fixed it myself in the driveway while he watched golf highlights inside. That was when Grace came by again, this time with soup and banana bread. She noticed how tired I looked, the hospital bag by the door, the way I kept rubbing my lower back. She asked if I had someone to drive me to the hospital if labor started. I wanted to say my husband, but the words wouldn't come out. She put her hand over mine and said, "Call me. Day or night, no questions." I almost cried right there. She had offered me more comfort in one sentence than Daniel had offered in weeks. That night, Daniel went out with friends for what he called one last normal evening before fatherhood, like fatherhood was a prison sentence and I was the guard locking the door. He came home after midnight smelling like beer and fell asleep without asking why I was sitting up in bed with tears in my eyes. I'd been timing irregular contractions for 2 hours. They faded by morning, but the fear didn't. I looked at him sleeping peacefully beside me and understood, for the first time, that if real labor started, I might be completely alone. The morning it happened began with the sound of suitcase wheels scraping across the hallway floor. Daniel pulled his luggage past the bedroom while I sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through a low, dull pressure that had woken me before sunrise. I told him I didn't feel right. He said I was probably just nervous because I'd worked myself up about the trip. I reminded him my due date was the next day. He said he'd be back before dinner if everything went according to plan. That sentence almost made me laugh out loud. Nothing about this pregnancy had gone according to plan. But Daniel's plan involved golf clubs, airport coffee, and his parents smiling in vacation photos. So apparently that was the only plan that mattered. He packed protein bars into his carry-on while his phone kept buzzing. His mother wanted to know if he'd left yet. His father wanted to know if he'd packed the golf glove. I asked him, one more time, to stay. Not forever. Just until our son was born safely. Daniel looked irritated instead of guilty. Rachel, I can't live my life around your anxiety, he said. I went quiet. He took my silence as permission and loaded his suitcase into the SUV. I followed him outside, because part of me still believed that if he saw me standing there, pale and shaking, he would remember I was his wife. He shut the trunk and checked his watch. I opened my mouth to say his name, and then warmth rushed down my legs. I looked down and saw fluid spreading across my leggings, onto the concrete. My water broke, I whispered. Then louder, Daniel, my water broke. I need to go to the hospital, now. For 1 second, he actually looked panicked. I reached for the passenger door, thinking he would finally choose us. Instead, his eyes dropped to the seat. He grabbed an old towel from the garage shelf and started wiping the edge of the passenger side. Even though I hadn't even sat down yet, I told him the baby was coming. He snapped that he knew and told me to stop yelling. I wasn't yelling. I was terrified. His phone buzzed again. He read the message and cursed, because his parents were already at the airport. I told him to drive me to the hospital. It was less than 20 minutes away. He rubbed both hands over his face and said, Rachel, listen to me. You'll be fine. Call a taxi or an Uber. The tickets are non-refundable, and my parents are waiting. I asked if he was really going to leave his laboring wife in the driveway. He said I was making it sound worse than it was. He said, first babies take hours. Hospitals have staff for exactly this, and he'd only be standing around uselessly. Then he asked what I even expected him to do there anyway. Hold my hand while I screamed? Something inside me went cold. I tried to grab the door handle, but he stepped between me and the car. Don't get in like that, he said, looking at my wet leggings. I just had the interior cleaned. That was when I stopped begging. I backed away slowly, gripping the side of the garage as another contraction hit. The pain bent me forward, but Daniel only looked toward the street as if he was embarrassed. Someone might see us. He didn't look like a husband watching his wife suffer. He looked like a man whose schedule had been interrupted. Daniel got into the SUV and said, text me when you get checked in. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. Then he drove away. For several seconds I just stood there, listening to the engine fade. It was strange how quiet the street felt after that. A dog barked somewhere. A delivery truck passed at the end of the block. Life kept moving, as if my whole world hadn't just split in half. 2 houses down, Grace's front door opened. I didn't know yet that her doorbell camera had recorded everything. My phone buzzed with one final text from Daniel. I'll call you when we land. Please don't start drama with my parents. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. I wanted to collapse, but another contraction reminded me my son still needed me. So I called Grace. I could barely speak. When I told her I needed help, she simply said, I'm coming. Less than a minute later she was beside me with towels, a calm voice, and steady hands. She helped me into her car, called the labor and delivery unit, and drove toward the hospital. As another contraction stole my breath, I watched my house disappear behind us. And I understood. A man who abandons you in your weakest moment should never again be trusted with the power to hurt you quietly. Grace drove with the kind of calm that kept me from falling apart. She didn't fill the car with questions or panic, just reminded me to breathe slowly and called ahead to the hospital. Later I learned she'd once worked as a labor and delivery nurse, which explained why her voice never wavered, even when mine did. The hospital, nurses brought a wheelchair and started checking me in. When one asked if my support person was parking the car, I swallowed hard and said, my support person is here. Then I pointed to Grace. The nurse understood. She put a privacy note in my file and asked if there was anyone I didn't want allowed into the room. My husband, I said. And his parents. Saying those words out loud felt like crossing a line inside myself. I expected guilt. I felt relief instead. Grace helped me call my parents in Denver. My mother answered cheerfully, until she heard my voice. I told her the baby was coming and Daniel wasn't there. After a painful silence, my father took the phone and said they were booking the next flight. He told me to focus on breathing and promised they were coming. Labor blurred everything after that. Pain rose and fell. My phone kept lighting up. At first, Daniel's texts were short updates. Boarding now. Any update? Don't ignore me, Rachel. Then his tone changed. Why is mom crying? Did you tell someone? What did you do? That was when I knew something had started outside that hospital room. But I didn't answer. My son needed all my strength. My parents arrived while I was still in labor, breathless from the airport and from fear. My mother cried for 1 second, then became strong for me. My father kissed my forehead and looked like he was trying not to break. Grace stepped back, but I asked her not to leave. She stayed. Hours later, my son was born, screaming, red-faced, and furious, as if he already knew he'd been disrespected. When the nurse placed him on my chest, everything else faded. Daniel, the driveway, the tickets, the SUV, all of it disappeared for one sacred minute. My baby was alive and safe, I whispered, you're safe, in my heart. I named him Owen Monroe because I wanted him tied first to the people who showed up when it mattered. My mother cried when she heard the name. My father put a hand over his mouth and turned away for a moment. I knew they understood what I was really saying. I wasn't just naming my son. I was choosing the family that had protected us. After I was moved to recovery, my phone began vibrating again. Daniel, his mother. Daniel again. My mother asked if I wanted it turned off. I said, not yet. When Daniel called again, I answered. His voice came through in panic. Rachel, what is going on? Why is there a video? Why is everyone messaging me? Did you send something to my company? Honey, talk to me. I waited for one question. Is the baby okay? Are you okay? Where are you? Can I come? Those weren't his first concerns. His panic was about himself, his reputation, his vacation collapsing around him. He didn't ask how much pain I'd been in. He didn't ask whether our son was breathing. Well, he didn't even say he was sorry. I looked at Owen sleeping in my mother's arms and said quietly, Daniel, that's the price you pay. Then I hung up. The room went silent. My mother looked proud in a sad way. My father nodded once. When Grace came back in, she asked if I was all right. I looked at my son and said, I'm not all right yet, but I'm done being his wife in every way that matters. That evening, hospital staff confirmed no visitors would be allowed without my permission. Daniel came anyway, with his parents, but they were stopped at the front desk. His mother cried loudly. His father demanded to speak to someone in charge. Daniel insisted he had rights as the father. None of them reached me. A nurse later told my mother that Daniel kept saying there had been a misunderstanding. I almost laughed when she told me that. There was no misunderstanding. There was a driveway, a camera, a laboring woman, and a man who chose a flight. For once, a closed door protected me instead of trapping me inside someone else's expectations. The video didn't spread because I wanted attention. I didn't wake up after childbirth and decide to ruin Daniel. He did that himself. Grace's doorbell camera faced the street and had captured part of the driveway. Daniel loading the SUV. My water breaking, the argument, his body blocking me from the passenger side. The car backing out while I stood there in pain. The audio was clear enough to hear the sentence that changed everything. Call a taxi or an Uber. The tickets are non-refundable. Grace showed the video to my parents, then to me. Watching it once was enough. In my memory, I'd felt small. On video, I looked abandoned. My father had to leave the room. My mother cried silently. Grace said she'd give me the file and delete any copy if I wanted. I told her to save it.at first. I thought I might need it for the divorce. I didn't know the truth was already moving through the world on its own. Grace had told her husband, Marcus, what happened. Marcus wasn't just our neighbor, he was also a major client and strategic partner of the company Daniel worked for. Daniel didn't know that, because he'd never cared enough to learn much about the people next door. Marcus didn't threaten anyone. He simply asked if I was safe and whether Daniel's company knew what kind of judgment their regional sales manager had shown. Meanwhile, Daniel and his parents made everything worse. His mother left a voicemail saying I had embarrassed the family, and that a wife shouldn't punish her husband over one misunderstanding. His father texted my father that childbirth was women's business, and Daniel had obligations already paid for. Daniel sent messages blaming me for making him look like a monster. He wrote that I had to fix this before it reached his office. He wrote that if I loved our son, I wouldn't destroy his father's career. Before the baby could even recognize him, every word he sent became evidence. The story first appeared in a local mom's group without my name. Someone asked whether a woman should forgive her husband for leaving her in labor because his flight was non-refundable. Then the blurred doorbell clip appeared. No names, no address, no baby information, but people recognized the SUV, Daniel's company polo, and the airport story he'd posted that same morning. The story jumped to Reddit, TikTok, Instagram. People started calling him non-refundable dad. They placed his smiling airport photo next to the blurred driveway clip. Daniel tried to say it was a misunderstanding, but the video, the texts, the hospital admission time, and Owen's birth time made that impossible. The company acted fast. Because their entire brand was built around family values, ads with fathers and toddlers, couples around fire pits, mothers wrapped in blankets on porches. Now, people were commenting under the company's posts asking if abandoning a laboring wife was part of their family lifestyle. Marcus canceled a strategy meeting and emailed leadership about judgment, reputation, and accountability. That email did more damage than all the comments combined. Daniel was called into a video meeting with HR while he was still in Arizona. He later accused me of setting him up, because the meeting happened before he'd even finished his first round of golf. That detail said everything. He still tried to play golf. After learning his son had been born, HR placed him on temporary leave. His quarterly bonus was frozen. His promotion was pulled from consideration. Marcus's account was reassigned. His coworkers stopped replying to his jokes. Even the people who used to laugh at his confidence started calling it arrogance behind his back. One coworker anonymously commented that Daniel had always talked about family values in his presentations, but treated the people beneath him like props. His mother faced her own reckoning when her voicemail and comments spread through her circles. His father's golf friends started avoiding him. One of them had a daughter who was also pregnant, and told Walter that what Daniel did wasn't old-fashioned. It was disgraceful. Social shame hit harder than legal trouble ever could have, because that family had always believed reputation proved goodness. Now reputation had become a mirror. Daniel tried to regain control by calling nonstop. When the hospital blocked him, he emailed. When I didn't answer, he contacted my parents. When my father told him all communication would go through a lawyer, Daniel exploded. He called me unstable, vindictive, hormonal, and unfit to make decisions. He demanded I make a public statement saying the video was misleading. My lawyer smiled coldly when she read that message. She said men like Daniel were helpful because they thought anger was power, so they kept creating more evidence. She sent a formal notice, no direct contact, no harassment, all communication about the baby, the separation, the property, and custody would go through her office. Daniel responded with one more voicemail. If I came home, maybe you'd forgive me, maybe. I saved it twice. By then, revenge wasn't something I had to chase anymore. It was happening on its own, because Daniel couldn't stop being himself. Every defense revealed another ugly truth. Every excuse became another piece of evidence. While he lost sleep over comments, HR meetings, a frozen bonus, and a promotion slipping away, I was learning how to feed Owen, sleep in pieces, and look at myself without seeing the woman left behind in that driveway. I saw a mother who survived it. I saw someone who finally understood that documented truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. By the time I left the hospital, Daniel had sent flowers, emails, apologies, accusations, and one long message claiming I was weaponizing motherhood. My parents brought Owen and me to a rental house. First, because I wasn't ready to go back to the place where Daniel had abandoned me. Grace arranged for a friend of Marcus's to be nearby on discharge day, not because we expected violence, but because Daniel and his parents had already shown they didn't respect boundaries. They came anyway. Daniel stood near the entrance with red eyes and a bouquet from the gift shop. His mother clutched a stuffed bear like a prop. His father stood behind them with his arms crossed. When Daniel saw me holding Owen, he stepped forward. My father moved between us, and hospital security did the same. Daniel called my name like I was supposed to soften. I didn't. Owen slept against my chest while the man who left us in a driveway begged for a public scene he could twist later. I got into my parents' car and left. That was the first time Daniel understood that access to me was no longer automatic. The divorce began quietly but firmly. My lawyer filed for separation, primary custody, child support, and a temporary communication order because of Daniel's harassment. She included the doorbell video, the hospital timeline, the texts, the voicemails, his father's message, and Daniel's own recorded calls. At first, Daniel refused to cooperate. He said marriage problems should stay inside the family. My lawyer replied that he had involved the airport, the internet, his employer, and both sets of parents. So that stage was over. He said he wanted to see Owen. She asked him to agree to supervise visits, parenting classes, and written communication through a custody app. Daniel called that insulting, then admitted he didn't see why babies needed fathers that early anyway. She wrote it down. Later, Daniel requested one phone call to clear the air. I agreed only because my lawyer and my parents were present, and the call was legally recorded. Daniel began by saying this had gone far enough, and that I needed to think about what I was doing to his life. I asked if he wanted to ask about Owen. He paused, then said Owen was a baby and didn't know what was happening. But he did. His job did. His parents did. He complained the company had frozen his bonus, that Marcus had pulled back from the account, that his mother was crying and his father couldn't go to the club without whispers. I said his choices had consequences. His voice turned sharp. He said, I could have just taken the Uber and handled it like an adult. My mother gasped. My lawyer lifted one finger, reminding me to stay calm. I did. I told Daniel. He had just confirmed everything I needed to know. He tried to backtrack, said he loved me, said we could start over if I posted a statement saying the video was misleading. He said a good mother would want her son to grow up with both parents under one roof. I told him a good mother would never teach her son that love means abandoning someone and demanding forgiveness afterward. Then, I looked at Owen sleeping against me and realized there was grief left but no confusion. I told Daniel I wasn't coming home, and I ended the call. After that, his own lawyer pushed him towards settlement because a courtroom would only expose more. I received primary physical custody. Daniel received limited, supervised visitation, with possible expansion only after parenting education, counseling, and consistent child support. All communication had to go through the custody app. Child support was calculated from his previous income, which made him furious. The house was sold, the debts were divided, and I kept Owen's furniture, my savings, my car, and every document. Daniel once thought I was too overwhelmed to organize. The company eventually let Daniel go during a restructuring. The official reason was poor cultural fit and reputational risk. Daniel told people I had cost him his career. But even the people who disliked online drama knew the truth. No one made him leave. No one made him say the tickets were non-refundable. No one made him block me from the car or try to golf. After learning his son had been born, he moved back in with his parents into the same house where he'd learned that men deserved to be served and women owed silence. His freelance sales work was unstable. The golf trips stopped. His mother stopped posting family quotes. His father stopped bragging about raising a strong son. The house that had once been where Daniel ran for comfort became the place where all three of them finally had to sit with the consequences they had once mocked me for warning them about. I moved to Denver with my parents for Owen's first year. Grace and Marcus stayed in our lives. She visited when Owen was 3 months old and cried when he wrapped his tiny hand around her finger. My parents slowly stopped looking at me with fear in their eyes. They started looking at me with hope again. I went back to teaching part-time when I was ready, not to prove anything, but because I wanted Owen to see a mother who rebuilt her life with patience and dignity. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was feeding a baby at 3 in the morning, signing legal papers, going to counseling, accepting help, learning that love without respect isn't love at all. It was also learning not to blame myself for trusting someone who had hidden his selfishness behind charm. The lesson I want people to take from this is simple. Character is revealed when your need interrupts someone else's comfort. Pregnancy, childbirth, illness, grief, fear. These are not inconveniences. They are the moments when real love either steps forward or exposes its absence. No woman should be taught that endurance is loyalty when her safety and her child's future are at risk. No man should be praised for providing money if he refuses to provide care. Owen will grow up knowing that responsibility isn't optional and that apologies mean nothing without change behavior. I want him to understand that strength isn't cruelty, boundaries aren't revenge, and protecting someone vulnerable is one of the clearest signs of love there is. Daniel believed I would forgive anything to keep the family together. He forgot that my son became my family the second he took his first breath. So if you were in my place, one day away from giving birth, watching your husband drive away because his tickets were non-refundable, would you forgive him for the sake of peace? Or would you choose your child, your dignity, and your future? Thank you for listening to another story from our channel. This story is completely fictional, created for entertainment and reflection on real-life themes. We hope it reminds you that your worth doesn't decrease because someone failed to appreciate it. And sometimes, the people who reject you simply clear the way for a better life.